What if the most dangerous secret of the Cold War landed in the mailbox of an ordinary American postman? It sounds head-spinning, right? The tremor started small. Not an earthquake, not a car accident, but a tiny, almost imperceptible shiver in the tips of Dorothy's gloved fingers. She felt it, even through the thick leather, the instant her hand brushed against that letter in the mail sack. Every day, the same route, the same houses, the same rhythmic thud of mail hitting boxes. For 15 years, Dorothy had been the silent, reliable pulse of her small town, delivering hopes and bills, birthday cards and forgotten memories. But on that crisp autumn morning, a different kind of delivery landed in her canvas bag. It was heavier than it looked, somehow colder, and it pulsed with an unspoken urgency that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She tried to tell herself it was just another letter, just another piece of paper. But she knew, deep down, the kind of knowing that bypasses logic and goes straight for your gut. This wasn't just paper. This was trouble. The kind of trouble that didn't just rattle a small town but could shake the very foundations of a nation. It was a fragment of a secret, dropped right into her routine, and before the day was out it would pull her and her husband, Pete, into a world of shadows, suspicion, and the chilling reality of a war fought not with bombs, but with whispers. A war that, for one ordinary American family, was about to get very, very personal. But before we dive deeper, if you're fascinated by the hidden battles of the Cold War, also if you love your country, then subscribe. We appreciate your support. And don't forget to comment where are you watching from. Dorothy and Pete lived a life etched in the comforting predictability of 1950s America. Their small, tidy house sat on Elm Street, a street just like 1,000 others across the country. Morning coffee brewed, the newspaper rustled, and the daily rhythm hummed along, undisturbed. Pete, a quiet man with a sturdy build and an even sturdier moral compass, worked at the local auto plant. Dorothy, with her sensible shoes and kind eyes, wore the uniform of the U.S. Postal Service with quiet pride. They were the backbone of their community, unremarkable in the best possible way. Their dreams were simple: a good life, a secure future, maybe a new refrigerator one day. They understood hard work, loyalty, and the clear lines between right and wrong. They certainly didn't understand codes, clandestine operations, or the chilling whispers of global espionage. That morning, like every other weekday, Dorothy was on her route. The air was crisp, the leaves turning, painting the suburban landscape in shades of fire and gold. She hummed a tune as she sorted the mail for the upcoming blocks, her gloved fingers flying through envelopes and circulars. The weight of the canvas bag on her shoulder was familiar, a comforting burden. Then she felt it. Tucked deep inside a stack meant for the quiet cul-de-sac of Maple Drive was an anomaly. Not an envelope that felt wrong because of a misshapen address or a smudged stamp. No, this was different. It was an ordinary white envelope, standard size, no frills. But it had a peculiar stiffness, almost as if it contained a thin piece of cardboard or something metallic. And it was addressed in neat, almost artistic cursive to a name she didn't recognize, at an address she definitely didn't recognize. Not because it was wrong, but because it didn't exist. Or at least it didn't exist on her route or anywhere in their small town's postal registry. It was a P.O. box number, but the town listed wasn't theirs. It was a town hours away, a big city, a place of bustling anonymous streets, not quiet Elm Street. Dorothy frowned, pulling the letter out. She turned it over in her hand. No return address, not even a postage stamp. Just a faint, almost invisible postmark, barely legible, suggesting it had been routed through a dizzying maze of distribution centers. Her 15 years of postal service screamed at her. This was wrong. Every instinct she had, trained by years of sorting, delivering, and sometimes redirecting, told her this letter was out of place. It shouldn't be here. How did it even get into her sack? She checked the date, the routing codes, everything was a jumble, a puzzle piece that didn't fit. She knew the rules. Misrouted mail was supposed to go back to the sorting office, but something about this letter held her. Maybe it was the strange weight. Maybe it was the way the paper felt, unexpectedly smooth, almost slick under her fingertips. Or maybe it was that prickle of unease that had started the moment she touched it. It wasn't curiosity that made her tuck it into her personal satchel instead of returning it. It was a nascent sense of responsibility, a feeling that this wasn't just a postal error but something else. Something that felt important, even dangerous. All day, the letter gnawed at her. With every house she visited, every smiling face she greeted, every "have a nice day," the presence of that strange, unstamped, misdirected envelope in her bag was a growing weight, a silent accusation. She tried to dismiss it. Maybe someone dropped it, maybe it slipped through a crack in the system. But the distinct, almost clinical precision of the handwriting, the complete lack of a return address, the impossibly distant P.O. box, it all added up to a big, fat question mark. When her shift finally ended, the autumn sun was already dipping below the horizon, casting long, purple shadows. Dorothy walked home, the letter still tucked away, a cold lump against her side. Pete was already there, the smell of his pipe tobacco mingling with the aroma of the stew he'd started. He looked up, a warm smile on his face. "Rough day, hun?" he asked, sensing her quietness. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to the kitchen table, pulled out the letter, and laid it down. "Pete," she said, her voice softer than usual, "I found something today." He squinted at it, his brow furrowed. He picked it up, turned it over. No stamp, no return address, and this P.O. box that's not from around here. His words were calm, but his grip on the envelope tightened. Pete had served in the war, seen things, understood the subtle tremors beneath the surface of peace. He had a sixth sense for trouble, honed in foxholes and firefights. He looked at Dorothy, then back at the letter. "What is it, Dor?" The kitchen light cast a warm glow on the table, but it did little to dispel the chill that had settled between Dorothy and Pete. They sat opposite each other, the mysterious envelope lying like a silent accusation between them. "It's not just the address, Pete," Dorothy whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's the way it feels, and how it got into my bag. It defies logic." Pete carefully ran his thumb over the sealed flap. "It's sealed tight, too, not even a wrinkle." He held it up to the light, turning it slowly. The paper seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, an unnerving quality. Most envelopes you can see a shadow of what's inside. A letter, a folded paper, but this, he tapped it gently. This feels like a solid block. Their investigative tools were rudimentary. A kitchen lamp, a magnifying glass from Pete's toolbox, and their combined years of common sense. They started with the obvious, the handwriting. It was beautiful, almost too perfect, as if drawn with a ruler. No flourishes, no variations, just precise, unwavering strokes. A printer, perhaps. But no, there were tiny human imperfections that suggested a skilled hand, not a machine. A hand trying very hard to look like a machine. "Look at this E," Pete pointed, his finger tracing a small curve. "See how it's almost identical to the other E's? Someone took their time, too much time for a simple letter." Dorothy leaned closer. "And the ink, it's so dark, not like the watery blue ink we use. This is almost black, rich. It doesn't bleed at all." They meticulously examined every inch of the envelope. No smudges, no fingerprints visible to the naked eye. It was pristine, as if it had been handled with extreme care, almost reverence. This wasn't a careless mistake. This was deliberate. The P.O. box address was in a large city, one known for its government buildings and international connections. This wasn't just someone sending a letter to the wrong town. This was target practice. "You think it's important?" Dorothy asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. "Or just some kind of joke?" Pete shook his head slowly. "Nobody goes to this much trouble for a joke, Dor. And the postmark, it's so faint, almost rubbed off. But I can make out New York City and a date from last week." New York City. That sent a fresh shiver down Dorothy's spine. The big city, far from their quiet, safe bubble. The kind of place where global events unfolded, where secrets were made and kept. They debated opening it. Dorothy, bound by postal regulations, felt a deep reluctance. "It's not our mail, Pete, it's tampering." But Pete argued back. "It's not going to its destination, Dorothy. It's lost. And frankly, this feels like something more than lost mail." The more they talked, the more the pieces clicked into place, creating a terrifying picture. The Cold War was a constant hum in the background of their lives, a distant thunder they usually ignored. Headlines screamed about Sputnik, about atomic bombs, about communist threats and shadowy agents. They'd always felt safe, protected by distance and the vastness of their country. Now that distance felt like it was shrinking. The enemy, whoever it was, felt a little too close. Pete, with his wartime experience, saw the potential danger more clearly. During the war, we had codes, secret messages. This has that feel, like it's meant to hide something, not just deliver it. He walked over to their small bookshelf, pulling out a thick leather-bound volume, his old military cryptography manual, a relic from his service days. He hadn't looked at it in years. Now he flipped through its yellowed pages, his mind already racing. But who would send it? Dorothy wondered aloud, her eyes wide with a growing apprehension. And why was it in my bag? That was the crucial question. Was it meant for her? Or was it a deliberate misdirection, a way to test the system? The possibilities were endless and each one more unsettling than the last. They were just ordinary people, not detectives, not spies. But they held something that felt extraordinarily significant. A weight began to settle on them, the weight of a secret too big for their small home. They decided against opening it. Not yet. They wanted to be sure of what they didn't quite know. But something was telling them to proceed with extreme caution. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a wrong address. This was a deliberate act, and they were, for whatever reason, caught in its wake. They felt the invisible eyes of the sender on them, even if it was just their own growing paranoia. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows seemed to carry a new, ominous meaning. They were no longer just observers of the world. They were unwilling participants in something profoundly unsettling. The quiet security of their home suddenly felt permeable, vulnerable. The discovery of the hidden compartment, the almost invisible watermark, shattered any lingering doubt. This wasn't a lost letter. This was a covert package. And Dorothy and Pete, by sheer accident, were now holding it. The air in their cozy kitchen suddenly felt thinner, colder, charged with an invisible tension. The world outside, the world of school buses and grocery lists, seemed to fade, replaced by the grim reality of the Cold War. They had lived through the anxiety of the McCarthy era, the fear of Reds under the bed. They'd seen newsreels of nuclear tests, heard radio reports of Soviet advancements in space. But those were abstract fears, distant threats. This was real. This was tangible. It was in their hands, sitting on their kitchen table. Pete returned to his old cryptography manual, now with a renewed, grim determination. He wasn't looking for codes within the address anymore. He was looking for WAYS secrets were hidden. Microdots, invisible inks, false bottoms, the manual detailed them all. The more he read, the more the unsettling reality sank in. This letter, this seemingly innocuous piece of mail, was a piece of a much larger, darker puzzle. Who would send something like this? Dorothy asked again, her voice hushed. And to whom? Pete shook his head. Someone who didn't want it found. Someone who knows how to move in the shadows. And given the times we're living in, it doesn't take much imagination to guess who. His gaze drifted to the newspaper on the table, a headline blaring about Soviet expansion. The unspoken word hung between them, spy. The thought sent a jolt of fear through Dorothy. Spies were figures of movies, of distant European capitals, not of quiet American suburbs, but the letter was here, in their home. Their immediate instinct was to go to the authorities, the local police. No, this felt bigger than local law enforcement. The FBI. The very word conjured images of dark suits and stern faces, a world utterly alien to them. They were just Dorothy and Pete. What if they were laughed at? What if they were dismissed? Or worse, what if getting involved made them targets? The fear wasn't irrational. The news was filled with stories of Cold War paranoia. People accused, lives ruined, secrets kept at all costs. They were ordinary people without protection, without knowledge. If this letter was truly a spy's communication, then the people involved were dangerous, very dangerous. We can't just take it to the police, Pete, Dorothy said, voicing her deepest fear. What if they don't believe us? Or what if whoever sent it finds out we have it? Pete nodded slowly. You're right, we need to be careful. We don't know who we can trust, not yet. He paused, tapping his fingers on the table. This isn't like finding a lost wallet door, this is a different kind of game. They spent the rest of the night poring over the letter, trying to find more clues, trying to understand what they had stumbled upon. They held it up to different lights, tried gently heating it. Pete remembered a story about invisible ink, even tried a faint whiff test to detect unusual chemicals, something Dorothy recalled from a detective novel. Nothing. The letter remained stubbornly silent, giving up only the smallest of hints. Its very inscrutability made it more terrifying. The decision coalesced between them, unspoken but understood. They couldn't ignore this. Their sense of civic duty, their quiet patriotism, wouldn't allow it. But they couldn't rush in blindly either. They needed more information. They needed proof. And most importantly, they needed a plan. The next morning, the ordinary world outside their windows seemed utterly alien. The neighbor mowing his lawn, the milkman making his rounds, it all felt like a thin veneer over a far more dangerous reality. Dorothy still had to go to work. Pete still had to go to the plant. But now every shadow felt deeper, every stranger's glance felt longer. They were acutely aware that they were now in possession of something truly dangerous, and whoever it belonged to likely wanted it back. Badly. Their initial step wouldn't be to a government agency. It would be a more subtle, calculated move. A test. A way to see if their suspicions were correct without putting themselves directly in the crosshairs. Pete remembered an old acquaintance, a former Army intelligence officer who had retired quietly to a university town a few hours away, now a professor of history. A man who might understand the nuance of the Cold War chess game better than anyone. A man who might know where to look, what to look for. The thought of reaching out to someone, anyone, outside their immediate circle was terrifying. But the alternative, doing nothing or blindly walking into danger, was even worse. The discovery of the microdot was a chilling confirmation, but it was also just the beginning. They had found the packaging of the secret, but not the secret itself. The small card, with its seemingly random sequence of characters, was the true enigma. Pete, his brow furrowed in concentration, pulled his old cryptography manual closer. Its pages, once filled with abstract theories and historical examples, now crackled with immediate, terrifying relevance. This, he mumbled, tracing a finger over a diagram of a one-time pad, this looks like it, or part of it anyway. A one-time pad was the holy grail of espionage encryption, theoretically unbreakable. It involved a key, often a random sequence of letters or numbers used only once to encrypt a message. Without the exact, identical key, the message remained gibberish. The problem was they didn't have the message. They had the key, or at least a key. The numbers and letters on the card were too few to be a full message, but too specific to be random. They were probably coordinates or a code name or perhaps the other half of a key. Dorothy watched him, her heart thumping against her ribs like a trapped bird. So, what does it mean, Pete? All these numbers. He shook his head, frustration etched on his face. It's like having half a recipe, Dor. We know it's important, we know it's food, but we don't know what kind or how to cook it. He tried cross-referencing the format with examples in his manual, but the specific combination on the card didn't match any standard military cipher he recognized. This was a custom job, designed for absolute secrecy. The sheer audacity of it left them speechless. To embed such a critical piece of information within the very fabric of an ordinary envelope, relying on its journey through the postal system, was a testament to the spies' cold calculation. It spoke of a network, an organization, confident in its methods and its reach, even into the heartland of America. The sense of isolation pressed in on them. They were alone in this, two ordinary people against an unseen enemy, holding a fragile piece of evidence that could ignite a powder keg. Their normal lives, once so reassuringly solid, felt like a distant dream. Every mundane task, washing dishes, hanging laundry was now imbued with a strange, unsettling irony. How could the world carry on so normally when such a dangerous secret was under their roof? The fear of making a wrong move was paralyzing. What if they went to the authorities and compromised the entire operation? What if the spy network was so deeply embedded that even the government couldn't be trusted? Pete's military training had instilled in him a healthy respect for intelligence protocols, but also a deep suspicion of bureaucracy. He knew that in a world of shadows, the loudest voice wasn't always the most effective. "We need help, Pete finally said, pushing the manual away. "Someone who understands this world. Someone who won't just file it away and forget about it, or worse, make it public before we know what we're dealing with." Dorothy knew exactly who he meant. Professor Davies, Pete's old Army intelligence acquaintance, now a history professor at a quiet university 3 hours away. A man Pete trusted implicitly, but the thought of involving someone else, of expanding their circle of danger, was terrifying. "Are you sure, Pete? He's not still involved in that kind of thing, is he?" she asked, her voice laced with apprehension. "No, he's a professor now, but he knows the game. He was good, He could read a code like other people read newspapers, and he's discreet. More discreet than the FBI would be, at least at first. We need to know what this is before we hand it over. Understand it. Protect IT." The decision was made. The next morning, under the guise of visiting an old Army buddy, they packed a small bag. The card with the microdot was carefully tucked inside a waterproof casing, which was then hidden in Pete's old Army footlocker, buried beneath innocuous items of clothing. They left no trace, told no one. Their journey felt less like a Sunday drive and more like an escape. Every car behind them, every set of eyes they met, seemed to hold a hidden meaning. The landscape, familiar and comforting, now felt vast and indifferent to their predicament. When they finally arrived at Professor Davies' quaint, ivy-covered house on the edge of the university campus, their nerves were frayed. Professor Davies, a man of wiry frame and kind, intelligent eyes, greeted them with genuine warmth, offering them tea and reminiscing about old Army days. He seemed an unlikely figure to hold the key to their terrifying puzzle. Pete, cutting straight to the chase, pulled out the small, laminated card. "Professor, we need your expertise. Dorothy here found this." He briefly recounted the story, his voice low and serious. Professor Davies listened patiently, his expression shifting from genial hospitality to focused intensity as Pete described the envelope, the untraceable paper, the embedded card. He picked up the card, his fingers tracing the cryptic symbols. His expression, initially one of academic interest, slowly hardened into something Pete recognized from their wartime days, a cold, analytical stare. Professor Davies' words were a punch to the gut. Top tier, live intelligence, shadow war. It wasn't just a spy, it was the spy. And Pete and Dorothy, by virtue of one misdirected letter, were now standing in the crosshairs. The professor, a man who lectured on the theoretical conflicts of bygone eras, was now face to face with a very real, very present conflict. His transformation was subtle but profound. The genial host was gone, replaced by the sharp, calculating mind of an intelligence analyst. He led them into his study, a room lined with books, overflowing with the accumulated knowledge of a lifetime. But their focus wasn't on the tomes of history. It was on the small, unassuming card. "A microdot," Professor Davies explained, his voice low and measured, "is a photograph reduced to the size of a pinhead. It contains a full page of text, sometimes even blueprints or images. They're nearly impossible to detect without specialized equipment, and even then they can be mistaken for dust. This one," he held up the card, "is particularly well executed." He pointed to the sequence of numbers and letters. "This isn't just gibberish. This is a component of what we call a one-time pad key. The other part of the key would be held by the recipient. They use both parts to decrypt a coded message. This fragment, combined with the location data, that P.O. box, tells the recipient not just what to look for, but where and how to find the next part of the communication, or even the full message." The implications were chilling. This wasn't just a message. It was a step in a chain, a link in a network. And by intercepting it, they had broken that chain. But that also meant they had possession of something incredibly valuable, something that could unravel a larger plot. So, what do we do? Dorothy asked, her voice tight with suppressed fear. Do we take it to the FBI immediately? Professor Davies paused, considering. He walked over to his window, gazing out at the quiet campus. Normally, yes, that would be the protocol. But this is not normal. This is a direct communication between deep cover agents. If we hand this over immediately without understanding its full implications, we risk two things. One, the official channels might move too slowly or too loudly, alerting the network. Two, we might lose the opportunity to use this as bait, to learn more about who sent it and who was meant to receive it. He turned back to them, his gaze piercing. This isn't just about catching a spy, Pete. This is about understanding an operation, about finding the source of the leak and the target of the information. And for that, we need to extract the information from that microdot, discreetly. He explained the process, carefully removing the microdot, developing it in a darkroom, then enlarging it. It was a delicate, time-consuming procedure, requiring precision and secrecy. I have a small, rudimentary darkroom setup in the basement, he said, for developing old photographs. It'll have to do. Pete and Dorothy exchanged a look. This was it. They were no longer just observers, they were active participants. Professor Davies, with his academic gravitas, was essentially recruiting them into a clandestine operation. Over the next few hours, the musty basement of Professor Davies' house became their makeshift intelligence lab. The air grew thick with the smell of developing chemicals. Pete, with his steady hands, helped Davies carefully extract the microdot from the card. It was painstaking work, requiring tweezers, a magnifying glass, and an abundance of patience. Each minute stretched into an eternity. Finally, the tiny speck, no bigger than a poppy seed, was transferred to a photographic slide. Then came the developing process. Davies, a man of methodical habits, worked with an almost surgical precision, dipping the slide into a series of chemical baths under the faint red glow of a darkroom lamp. Dorothy and Pete watched, holding their breath, as the image slowly, miraculously began to appear. It wasn't text. It was a diagram. A complex, intricate drawing filled with labels and specifications. As Davies carefully magnified it, projecting it onto a small screen, the details became horrifyingly clear. It was a blueprint. Not just any blueprint, but a highly sensitive, top-secret design. A detailed schematic of a new, experimental military aircraft. A jet unlike anything the public had ever seen. Its sleek lines, its unique engine configuration, its classified weaponry systems, it was all laid bare. The implications hit them like a physical blow. This wasn't just some general intelligence. This was the crown jewel of American military innovation. It was a design that, if it fell into enemy hands, could shift the global balance of power, rendering American defenses obsolete. The blueprint blazed on the basement wall, a stark, terrifying image of national vulnerability. The stylized eagle, the classified codes, the proximity of the facility. It painted a picture of betrayal so profound it left them reeling. This wasn't just a threat. It was an act of war executed with chilling precision. The Air Force facility Pete had recognized was a fortress, a symbol of American ingenuity and security. For a blueprint of this magnitude to escape its walls meant an insider, a deep-cover agent, had breached the ultimate defense. Professor Davies, his face grim, paced the small darkroom. This changes everything. This isn't just intelligence gathering. This is industrial espionage of the highest order. If the Soviets get their hands on this design, they could replicate it, or worse, develop countermeasures before our own forces even get it off the ground. The balance of power shifts. The immediate terror was palpable. They weren't just holding a secret anymore, they were holding the fate of national security. The weight of it was crushing. But who? Dorothy whispered, her eyes fixed on the blueprint. Who could have done this? Someone with access, Pete answered, his voice hard. Someone who was trusted, and someone who knows how to operate without leaving a trace. Their focus narrowed. They had the blueprint and they had the P.O. box address in New York City. The next step was clear: find the intended recipient, the person who was waiting for this devastating piece of information. But how? They couldn't just walk into a post office in New York City and ask for the holder of the box. Professor Davies, ever the strategist, outlined the challenge. The P.O. box itself is a dead end. It's an anonymous address designed for exactly this purpose. The holder would likely be using a false identity. But, he added, a flicker of an idea in his eyes, we know they were expecting a delivery, and we know they didn't get it. The missing letter was a powerful anomaly. The spy who sent it and the spy who was meant to receive it were both now operating in the dark, wondering what happened to their critical communication. This created an opening, a vulnerability. The recipient, Davies continued, will eventually check that P.O. box. They'll be expecting a regular delivery. When they find nothing, they'll know something's wrong. They won't make a fuss, they won't complain, but they will react. And that reaction might be our only lead. Their plan began to form, born out of necessity and a terrifying sense of responsibility. They were the only ONES who knew the full picture. Going to the authorities still felt premature, potentially jeopardizing the chance to catch the recipient, to unravel the network. This was their moment to act, to leverage their anonymity. Pete and Dorothy would go to New York City. Their cover: a weekend trip, tourists taking in the sights. Who would suspect a middle-aged postman and her factory worker husband of being involved in international espionage? It was the perfect disguise. The journey to New York City was a blur of heightened senses. The bustling streets, the towering buildings, the sheer anonymity of millions of people. It was overwhelming. Their small town felt a million miles away, a naive dream. Every face in the crowd seemed to hide a secret. They felt like two tiny specks in a vast, indifferent ocean, but they carried a secret that could sink navies. They found the post office listed on the envelope. It was a grand, ornate building, a cathedral of communication, buzzing with people. They staked it out, taking turns, trying to blend in. Dorothy, with her years of postal experience, knew the rhythms of a post office, the peak times, the quiet lulls, the patterns of regular customers. Pete, with his wartime training and observation, noticed the subtle details, the way people carried themselves, the unconscious tells. Hours bled into days. They waited, watched, and learned. They noted every person who approached the P.O. box section, observing their demeanor, their interactions. They saw the hurried, the indifferent, the frustrated. But they were looking for something else, the subtle shift in a spy's face when a critical delivery fails. The P.O. box was in a busy corridor, a place of constant movement. It was like trying to spot a specific fish in a crowded aquarium. Pete and Dorothy were exhausted, the pressure mounting. They bought cheap hot dogs from a street vendor, trying to look like typical tourists, but their eyes never left the P.O. boxes. Then, on the third day, as the afternoon crowd began to thin, he appeared. A man of average height, average build, wearing an unremarkable gray suit and a fedora. He looked like 1,000 other businessmen. He walked with purpose but without haste directly towards the P.O. box section. He didn't stand out. He didn't make eye contact. He was a ghost in plain sight. He approached their target P.O. box, opened it with a small key, and reached inside. There was a brief pause. His hand emerged empty. For a split second, a flicker of something passed across his face, not anger, not panic, but a profound, almost imperceptible shift. A tightening around the eyes, a clenching of the jaw. A trained, controlled disappointment. He closed the box, locked it, and began to walk away. Pete and Dorothy held their breath. This was him. They knew it. But what would he do next? Would he just leave, disappear back into the urban sprawl? Or would he signal his failure? The street swallowed the man in the fedora, but the cold dread he left behind lingered like exhaust fumes in the humid New York air. Pete and Dorothy didn't move for a long moment, their eyes fixed on the lamppost. It looked utterly ordinary, an iron sentinel against the backdrop of skyscrapers, but they knew better. That lamppost was now a beacon, a silent alarm, broadcasting a message only a select few would understand. Their hearts pounded, a frantic drumbeat against the city's roar. He signaled someone, Dorothy breathed, her voice a little shaky. A warning. Pete nodded, his jaw tight. And that lamppost, it's a dead drop, or a signal point. He's telling whoever is watching that the package didn't arrive. They had to move, but carefully. They couldn't just rush out and confront a potential spy. That was suicide. They also couldn't let the signal go unnoticed. This was their chance, perhaps their only chance, to see the network in action, to see the other side of the shadow. Pete, drawing on his wartime training, quickly assessed the situation. We need to get to Professor Davies. He'll know what this means, what the next move is. They melted back into the crowd, walking rapidly but not frantically, maintaining their appearance as regular tourists, yet their senses were screaming. Every passerby became a potential threat, every parked car a possible lookout. The exhilaration of the hunt was now laced with the terrifying certainty that they were the hunted. Back at a payphone in a busy diner, Pete fed coins into the slot, his hand surprisingly steady. Professor Davies listened intently as Pete recounted the scene at the post office, the man, the fedora, the precise gesture, and the lingering glance at the lamppost. There was a long silence on the other end. When Davies finally spoke, his voice was grave. Pete, you just witnessed a negative indicator signal. It's a standard operational procedure. He didn't just warn his network, he activated it. He's alerted a cleaner, an agent whose job it is to understand what went wrong, trace the failure, and eliminate loose ends. He's also likely giving a new rendezvous point for them to meet, or a new instruction for how he should proceed without the package. The implications were stark. The hunt for the missing blueprint wasn't just going to be passive, it was going to be active and aggressive. The network would be searching meticulously for any disturbance in their carefully constructed world. What do we do? Dorothy asked, a tremor in her voice. You have a choice, Davies said, his voice firm. You can give me the blueprint now and I'll take it to the highest levels of federal intelligence. You walk away, your involvement becomes a classified footnote, or we can use this. We can use the fact that they know the message is compromised. We can set a trap. The choice wasn't really a choice for Pete and Dorothy. They had come this far. They had put their lives on the line. Walking away now felt like a betrayal of their own courage, a surrender to the darkness. And deep down, they understood something vital. They were uniquely positioned. They were invisible, unremarkable, and that, in the world of espionage, was a powerful weapon. We set the trap, Professor, Pete said without hesitation. How? Davies outlined a plan, audacious and dangerous, born of his years studying Cold War tactics. They couldn't deliver the original blueprint. That was too risky, too valuable. But they could deliver a decoy, a fake, something that would lead the spy network down a rabbit hole, buying time and exposing more of their agents. Here's what we do, Davies explained. We use the P.O. box. The spy knows it's compromised for a direct delivery. But if a mistake is made, if a different letter, seemingly unrelated but containing a modified signal, were to appear, it might entice them. We give them a modified microdot, one that contains a false blueprint but also a tracer element. Something that will lead US to them, not the other way around. The plan was simple in its core but terrifying in its execution. Dorothy, the postman, would accidentally misroute a letter containing the decoy. Pete would ensure it found its way into the right channel, appearing as a genuine postal error, not an intentional act. The spy, expecting a recovery attempt, would likely send a different agent or use a new, more discreet method to retrieve it. And that agent, that method, would be their target. The specific tracer element was Davies' genius. He had access to a highly experimental, almost undetectable luminescent powder, visible only under specific ultraviolet light frequencies. A speck of this powder mixed with the microdot's adhesive would subtly tag whoever handled it, leaving a trail only they could see. It was a long shot, but it was their only shot. Pete and Dorothy spent the next few hours in a clandestine meeting with Davies' trusted contact, a retired chemist who still had access to his old lab. They meticulously prepared a new, almost identical envelope. Inside, a fake card containing a microdot with a subtly altered, less critical blueprint, along with the invisible powder. This new package would be their bait. The next day felt like an out-of-body experience. Dorothy, dressed in her postal uniform, the new, carefully prepared decoy envelope tucked into her official mail sack, walked her route in New York City. Not her usual route in her quiet town, but a specially arranged, temporary assignment at a post office near the Target P.O. box. This was a critical part of the cover. A postal worker, a legitimate reason to be there. Who would suspect her? Pete was her silent shadow, blending into the lunchtime crowds, pretending to read a newspaper at a park bench across from the post office. His eyes, however, constantly scanning, analyzing every face, every movement. His heart hammered with a desperate rhythm, trying to match the casual pace of the city. He looked for anything out of place, anything that didn't fit. A shadow too long, a glance too direct, a person waiting without apparent purpose. Dorothy's task was to misplace the decoy letter, not in a way that seemed deliberate, but as a genuine postal error, common enough in the bustling chaos of a city post office. She found her moment. In a busy sorting area, amidst stacks of mail, she subtly nudged the decoy envelope from one bin to another, ensuring it would eventually be routed to the P.O. box. It wasn't direct, it was circuitous, designed to look like bureaucracy, not espionage. The waiting was the hardest part. The uncertainty was a constant, gnawing dread. Every hour felt like an eternity. They had to assume they were being watched, that the cleaner was already on the move, assessing the situation, looking for the disturbance that led to the missing blueprint. Days passed. The decoy letter, as planned, was eventually routed to the P.O. box. The pressure mounted. Had they been too obvious, too subtle? Had the network moved on, cutting their losses? Then, on the fourth day, he appeared. Not the man in the fedora, but a different figure, taller, leaner, with a dark overcoat despite the mild weather. He moved with a quiet efficiency that spoke of training. He entered the post office, moved directly to the P.O. box section, opened the box, and withdrew the decoy letter. This time, Pete and Dorothy were ready. They had positioned themselves at a nearby coffee shop, pretending to sip lukewarm coffee, watching through the plate glass window. They saw the man retrieve the letter. There was no flicker of surprise, no visible reaction. He simply pocketed it and walked out. Now what? Dorothy whispered, her hand gripping Pete's arm. Now we follow, Pete replied, his voice low and steady. But not too close. Professor Davies is waiting for our call. Their stakeout transformed into a delicate dance of pursuit. The agent was good. He weaved through crowds, ducked into department stores, even boarded a bus for a single stop, all classic counter-surveillance tactics. Pete, relying on his instincts and Dorothy's street-level knowledge of city rhythms, managed to keep him in sight. They kept a block's distance, sometimes more, using the sheer volume of New Yorkers as their cover. They were two faces among millions, unremarkable, forgettable. That was their strength. The agent led them on a circuitous route, seemingly without purpose, through residential streets, past laundromats, and into a public library. This was the dead drop dance, a series of pre-planned maneuvers designed to shake off any potential tail. Inside the library, the agent walked directly to the nonfiction section, pulled a specific book from a shelf, and stood there for a long moment, pretending to read. Pete, from a distance, saw it. The agent's fingers not turning pages but subtly working at something within the book's spine. A second later, the book was back on the shelf. The agent walked out, his mission seemingly complete. Pete and Dorothy exchanged a look. The tracer, Dorothy breathed. He touched the book. They waited a few minutes, allowing the agent to get a head start. Then Pete approached the shelf. He found the book, a worn copy of the history of the world. He pulled it out. The glowing dust on the library shelves painted a chilling picture. This wasn't a recent addition to the spies' routine. It was a deeply ingrained system. The library, a public sanctuary of knowledge, was a regular dead drop for a network of enemies. Pete and Dorothy realized they weren't just tracking a single agent. They were tracing a well-oiled machine, leaving glowing breadcrumbs for them to follow. They called Professor Davies, relaying their discovery. His voice, usually calm, held a note of urgency. "Excellent work, Pete, Dorothy. That means the agent removed the microdot and he's either taking it to a handler for decryption or he's decrypting it himself at a safe house. The powder trail should lead us to him, or at least to the next link in the chain." Davies explained the new plan. He had quietly alerted a trusted, small team within the FBI's counterintelligence division, ensuring their identities remained completely anonymous. This team, operating under his guidance, would be ready to move in, but only when Pete and Dorothy gave the signal. They were the eyes on the ground, the only ONES who could follow the invisible trail. The chase was on. They followed the faint, almost imperceptible luminescence, visible only through their specialized UV flashlights, now subtly disguised as ordinary pens. The glow led them out of the library, through a maze of back alleys, past bustling marketplaces, and finally into a quiet, unassuming residential neighborhood. The agent was being meticulous, choosing routes designed to lose any pursuers, routes only someone with local knowledge would use. They were deep in an unfamiliar part of the city when the glowing trail led them to a brownstone apartment building, unremarkable in every way. The glow was concentrated around a specific mail slot, then faded into the dimly lit hallway inside. "This is it," Pete whispered, his hand on Dorothy's arm. "A safe house or his apartment." They relayed the address to Professor Davies, who in turn passed it to the waiting FBI team. But Davies had one final, terrifying instruction for them. "Pete, Dorothy, the FBI team is moving, but there's a chance he might realize he's being followed before they get there. He'll destroy everything. We need eyes on the apartment. Can you get eyes on him?" It was a gamble. It meant putting themselves directly in harm's way without backup, but they understood the stakes. If the agent destroyed the evidence, years of infiltration might continue. They exchanged a look. The answer was clear. They found a discreet vantage point across the street, a parked delivery van. From there, they could see the entrance to the brownstone. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound was amplified. Then the door to the brownstone opened. It wasn't the agent they had been following. It was a woman, mid-30s, elegantly dressed, carrying a small, unassuming shopping bag. She was leaving, heading out onto the street. And as she stepped into the faint glow of a street lamp, Pete saw it. A faint, almost ghost-like blue-green shimmer on the strap of her handbag, and subtly around the cuffs of her gloves. She had handled the package. She was the contact, the handler, or perhaps the ultimate recipient. She wasn't the one who picked up the mail. She was the one who processed IT. Pete grabbed Dorothy's arm. "Look," he whispered, pointing. Just as the woman reached the corner, a plain black sedan, moving slowly, pulled up alongside her. The driver leaned over, spoke a few quick words. The woman paused, looked around, then quickly got into the car. The sedan sped off, disappearing into the city traffic. "They're extracting her." Dorothy gasped. "He must have signaled the cover blown and they're pulling her out." Their hearts sank. They had been so close. The network was too fast, too efficient. The cleaner had done his job, realizing the decoy was a trap and extracting the asset before the FBI could move in. But then Pete saw something else. As the black sedan made a quick turn, a small, dark object flew from its open window, skittering across the pavement and coming to rest near a storm drain. It was small, no bigger than a matchbox. "Wait here," Pete said, already moving. He sprinted across the street, dodging traffic, adrenaline coursing through him. He reached the storm drain, his eyes scanning frantically. He found it. A small wooden box, crudely made but surprisingly sturdy. He opened it carefully. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, was a single, tiny, intricately carved wooden bird, and clutched in its beak, a tightly rolled, almost microscopic piece of paper. The small, hand-drawn map with its ominous directive was the final, terrifying piece of the puzzle. Friday, dawn, deliver or burn. It was a desperate Hail Mary, a contingency plan activated by the extracted agent, a last-ditch effort to pass on crucial information for an unknown operation. The hammer and sickle symbol left no doubt about the source. Pete and Dorothy immediately relayed their discovery to Professor Davies, who, in turn, informed the FBI team now swarming the brownstone. The wooden bird, the map, the specific park, it all gave the authorities a direct target. The FBI moved with unprecedented speed, setting up surveillance on the park, preparing for an early morning apprehension. The apprehension was successful. At dawn on Friday, a new agent, coming to retrieve or execute the deliver or burn directive, walked into a carefully laid trap. They found him with a specialized device, a miniaturized camera intended to photograph a new set of instructions left at the bench. The operation was entirely thwarted, thanks to the combined, unwitting efforts of a postman and her husband. Pete and Dorothy never saw the agents being apprehended. Their role was to gather intelligence, not to participate in the raid. Professor Davies escorted them back to their small, quiet town, their cover as anonymous tourists maintained. The journey home was quiet, filled with the unspoken weight of what they had experienced. Their lives would never be the same. The world they returned to, the world of Elm Street, morning coffee, and predictable routines, felt like a stage production, a carefully constructed illusion. They saw the shadows now, where before there was only light. They understood the hidden battles, the silent wars waged beneath the surface of everyday life. Their heroism went unsung. There were no medals, no public accolades. Their story, along with the blueprint, the microdots, and the details of the spy network, was classified top secret. A quiet visit from a high-ranking government official, a man with steel-gray eyes and a handshake that conveyed unspoken gratitude, was their only reward. He thanked them for their extraordinary service to the nation and assured them that their courage had averted a crisis of unimaginable scale. They learned, discreetly, that the blueprint was indeed for the cutting-edge reconnaissance aircraft, and its compromise would have given the Soviets a monumental advantage. The deliver or burn operation was intended to pass on a critical piece of counter-surveillance technology that would have severely hampered U.S. intelligence efforts for years. Their actions hadn't just caught a spy. They had dismantled a significant portion of a sophisticated espionage cell, preventing two major intelligence losses. Back home, Dorothy continued her postal route, the canvas bag on her shoulder feeling both lighter and heavier. Lighter, because the immediate danger was gone. Heavier because of the knowledge she now carried. Every letter, every envelope now held a deeper meaning. It could be mundane, it could be a life, or it could be a secret that could change the world. Pete returned to the auto plant, the rhythmic clang of machinery a stark contrast to the silent hum of the spy world. He looked at his fellow workers, at his neighbors, and saw their innocent trust in the world, their belief in its simple order. And he knew, with a quiet certainty, that sometimes the most profound acts of courage come not from soldiers or agents, but from the ordinary people who simply refuse to look away when trouble comes knocking. They had caught someone with a mysterious letter. More than that, they had stood up to the silent specter of the Cold War, and they had won. Not with guns or gadgets, but with an ordinary postman's instinct, a factory worker's common sense, and an unwavering belief in what was right. Their story remained untold, a secret thread woven into the fabric of American history. And as the years passed, they understood the true cost of their courage wasn't just the fear, but the knowledge. The knowledge that the world was always balancing on a knife edge, and that even the smallest, most unassuming actions could tip the scales. The brownstone in New York City, the glowing dust, the tiny wooden bird, these images were etched onto Dorothy's and Pete's minds, vivid and permanent. They returned to Elm Street, to the familiar rhythms of their lives, but the world had irrevocably shifted. It was as if they had donned a special pair of spectacles, suddenly seeing the intricate, invisible threads that connected everything, the shadow play beneath the surface. The quaint houses, the laughing children, the bustling local market, all of it now seemed fragile, a beautifully crafted stage set designed to conceal a far more complex and perilous reality. The relief of the immediate danger passing was quickly replaced by the profound, unsettling weight of what they now knew. They were survivors, but their innocence had been irrevocably lost. For Dorothy, her postal route, once a source of comforting routine, became a daily exercise in quiet vigilance. Every letter, every package, was no longer just a piece of paper. It was a potential carrier of secrets, a silent whisper in the grand, global conversation. She'd always prided herself on her attention to detail, her ability to notice a changed address or a faint smudged postmark. Now those details took on a new, almost sacred importance. She didn't actively look for anomalies, not anymore. The high-stakes game in New York had taught them the danger of direct intervention, but her senses were irrevocably sharpened. She noticed the nuances of handwriting, the specific types of paper, the subtle variations in postmarks that most would dismiss as mere inconsistencies. She could almost feel the weight of intent behind certain envelopes, the silent stories they carried. It was a burden, a constant, low thrum of awareness that others didn't share. She never found another microdot, never intercepted another blueprint, but the possibility was always there, lurking in the crisp white envelopes and brown packages. She understood that her role, the humble postman's role, was far more critical than anyone acknowledged. She was a gatekeeper, a silent sentinel on the front lines of information. The knowledge isolated her in a way. How could she explain to Mrs. Henderson that the simple birthday card from her nephew could, in another life, be a cover for an intelligence drop? It was an unspoken truth, a secret she carried with every step of her route, a silent badge of courage no one else could see. The familiar faces of her neighbors, once comforting, now sometimes sparked a flicker of unsettling possibility. What secrets did they carry? Pete, too, found his perspective irrevocably altered. The clamor and rhythm of the auto plant, once a reassuring symphony of productivity, now held a different kind of meaning. He looked at the machinery, the intricate workings of engines, and saw patterns, vulnerabilities, and the potential for sabotage where before he'd only seen mechanics. His experience with the blueprint had given him a chilling insight into the value of industrial secrets, the power of technological advantage. He saw the world in terms of strategic assets, of information flow, of potential points of failure. When news broke of some international incident, some distant geopolitical tremor, he didn't just hear the headlines. He sifted through them, searching for the underlying currents, the whispers of the shadow war. He'd spend hours in his workshop, not just on car repairs but tinkering, building small, seemingly innocuous devices. Sometimes it was a more secure lock for their back door. Other times it was a finely tuned radio, capable of picking up faint, unusual signals. He never confessed his true intentions, not even to Dorothy, but she understood. They were both building their own quiet defenses, fortifying their small world against a threat they knew could materialize from anywhere, at any time. His hands, once solely skilled in wrenching and turning, now possessed a different kind of sensitivity, a tactical awareness that saw danger in the mundane. Their shared secret became the unspoken bedrock of their marriage, binding them in a way few couples could ever comprehend. It wasn't a secret from each other, but a secret they shared against the rest of the world. It was an invisible bond, forged in the fires of fear and courage. They communicated in subtle glances, in unspoken understandings, in the careful choice of words when discussing anything remotely related to current events. The easy banter of their pre-spy days had evolved into something deeper, more profound, tinged with a quiet, mutual respect and an enduring, almost fierce protectiveness. They were each other's only confidants in this strange new reality. When the evening news reported on Soviet space launches or escalating tensions in Berlin, a silent look would pass between them, acknowledging the invisible war that still raged, a war they knew intimately, intimately enough to feel its cold breath on their necks, even from thousands of miles away. They learned to listen between the lines, to infer meaning from omissions, to trust their gut feelings over official pronouncements. Their conversations, while outwardly normal, often carried a subtle undercurrent of coded understanding, a shorthand only they shared. Pete and Dorothy never knew if their anonymous tip had led to anything concrete. They never heard anything on the news. The events of the Millers' short stay in their town simply dissolved back into the quiet fabric of Elm Street life. But the experience served as a chilling, quiet confirmation. The Shadow War wasn't just in New York or Berlin or Moscow. It was everywhere. It was in the unassuming houses, behind the drawn curtains in the quiet streets of small-town America. And they, Dorothy and Pete, two ordinary people, forever bound by an extraordinary secret, were its silent, unwitting guardians. The world was indeed balancing on a knife edge, and they had become intimately aware of the invisible hands that sometimes tried to push it one way or another. Their courage had not just averted a crisis. It had transformed them, making them perpetual sentinels, forever watching, forever understanding the true weight of unspoken knowledge. They understood that the most impactful battles are often fought not with grand gestures, but with quiet observation, unwavering integrity, and the simple act of noticing. They had become the quiet heroes, the unseen protectors, living proof that even in the deepest shadows, the light of human conscience and vigilance can still shine. What Dorothy and Pete did was extraordinary, born from a simple act of civic duty and an unshakable moral compass. Their story, like so many others from that tense, shadowy era, reminds us that the Cold War wasn't just fought by presidents and generals. It was fought quietly, courageously by ordinary Americans in their homes, in their workplaces, sometimes even on their mail routes. Their bravery averted a catastrophe, proving that sometimes the biggest heroes are the ones you'd never expect. And if you think their story is unique, you haven't scratched the surface. There are countless other untold stories of ordinary citizens who stumbled upon secrets, fought silent battles, and protected their nation from the shadows. Stories like the quiet librarian who discovered a coded message hidden in a children's book, or the amateur radio operator who intercepted a foreign broadcast that changed the course of history. Curious to hear more about how everyday people shape the course of nations? Click right here to discover another incredible true story of an unsuspecting hero who decoded a message that saved thousands of lives.